You know what's harder than negotiating a trade deal with China? Apparently, telling Doug Ford about it first. Mark Carney just slashed Canada's tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles from 100% down to something way more China-friendly, and Doug Ford is so mad he's practically vibrating through your screen right now. We're talking terrible, miscalculated decision levels of mad. And the best part? Donald Trump is already in a full-blown trade war with Canada, so naturally this is the perfect time to cozy up to Beijing and start importing Chinese EVs. What could possibly go wrong? Stick around, because this disaster is unfolding in real time and honestly, you can't make this stuff up. Welcome back to Canadian Insights, where Canadian politics is messier than your group chat after someone brings up who's paying for dinner. Okay, let's rewind to Friday when Mark Carney decided to drop this bombshell like he was announcing a new pizza topping instead of fundamentally reshaping Canada's automotive trade policy. The Prime Minister flies to Beijing, sits down with Chinese officials, and emerges with what he presumably thinks is a genius move. Canada agrees to slash its 100% tariff on Chinese electric vehicles. In exchange, China pinky promises to cut its retaliatory tariffs on Canadian canola and seafood. Carney probably thought he'd be greeted as a hero. Prairie farmers celebrating in the wheat fields, maritime fishers throwing a lobster fest in his honor, everyone winning together. Instead, Doug Ford took one look at this deal and basically said, "Are you trying to destroy Ontario or is this just a happy accident?" Here's the thing about that 100% tariff that Carney just slashed. It wasn't there for decoration. It wasn't some random number someone pulled out of a hat during a boring cabinet meeting. That tariff existed specifically to protect Canadian and North American automakers from being absolutely demolished by subsidized Chinese electric vehicles that can undercut prices so dramatically it makes Black Friday sales look expensive. Chinese EV manufacturers have the backing of their government, massive production scale, and cost structures that Western companies simply cannot compete with on price alone. So when you had a 100% tariff, you were essentially saying, sure, you can sell your cars here, but we're going to make sure Canadian workers aren't competing with Beijing's Treasury Department. It was a wall. Not a perfect wall, but a wall nonetheless. And Carney just knocked it down with a smile and a handshake. Doug Ford is standing in Ontario watching this happen, and is doing the political equivalent of that math lady meme trying to figure out what universe this makes sense in. Because here's what Ford sees. He sees an auto sector that employs hundreds of thousands of Ontarians. He sees manufacturing plants in Windsor, Oshawa, and across the province that depend on being competitive in North American markets. He sees supply chains that feed families and build communities. And then he sees the Prime Minister trading all of that stability for canola and seafood access to China. Now, I'm not saying canola and seafood don't matter. They absolutely do. But when you're the Premier of Ontario and your entire economic engine is built on automotive manufacturing, watching the federal government sacrifice your sector for someone else's sector feels less like governance and more like getting sold out. The timing on this is so spectacularly bad it almost deserves an award. Like, if there were Oscars for political miscalculation, this would sweep every category. Donald Trump is currently waging a trade war with Canada. Not a minor disagreement. Not a gentle tariff adjustment. An actual trade war complete with threats, counter-threats, and enough economic uncertainty to make investors nervous and business leaders sweaty. Trump has made it abundantly clear that he views Chinese manufacturing, especially in the auto sector, as a direct threat to American workers and American industry. His implemented tariffs, pushed for supply chain reshoring, and basically built an entire political brand around protecting American manufacturing from Chinese competition. So naturally, this is the perfect moment for Canada to slash tariffs on Chinese EVs and potentially create a backdoor into the North American market. I'm sure Trump will be totally cool with this. He's known for his measured responses and calm demeanor when allies do things he doesn't like, right? Ford isn't just worried about Ontario. He's worried about the Americans closing the border to Canadian auto exports because we've become a potential entry point for Chinese vehicles they're actively trying to keep out. The North American auto industry is integrated like a jigsaw puzzle where pieces cross the border multiple times during production. A single vehicle might have parts manufactured in Canada, assembled in the United States, with components from Mexico, all working together under trade agreements that assume everyone's playing by the same rules. When Canada starts playing by different rules, especially rules that favor China while America is fighting China economically, that puzzle stops fitting together. And when the puzzle doesn't fit, plants close, workers get laid off, and communities that depend on those jobs get devastated. Let's talk about what Ford actually said, because his language here is important. Terrible, miscalculated decision. That's not typical political speak. Politicians usually couch their criticism in diplomatic language, talk about concerns and considerations and the need for further discussion. When a premier uses the word terrible twice in the same sentence, he's not expressing mild disagreement. He's waving red flags and sounding alarm bells and basically screaming that this is a disaster in progress. Ford specifically called out the damage to auto manufacturers and the supply chain, which tells you exactly where his priorities are and exactly what he thinks Carney just sacrificed. The canola and seafood industries obviously have a different perspective. They've been getting hammered by Chinese retaliatory tariffs, watching their market access shrink and their exports suffer. For them, this deal is a lifeline. China is a massive market, and having reduced tariffs means Canadian producers can compete more effectively and hopefully start recovering lost ground. But here's the uncomfortable truth that nobody in Ottawa wants to say out loud. Not all sectors are created equal when it comes to economic impact and job creation. The auto sector in Ontario employs vastly more people, generates significantly more economic activity, and has deeper supply chain integration than canola or seafood exports. That doesn't mean those industries don't matter. It means that when you're making trade-offs, you better be damn sure you're not trading a $20 bill for a $5 bill just because the $5 bill is newer. There's also the question of whether China will even honor their side of this bargain. China has a long and colorful history of promising market access, agreeing to reduce barriers, and then finding creative ways to maintain restrictions through regulations, standards, inspections, and bureaucratic delays that somehow only affect foreign products. We've seen this movie before. Canada makes concessions hoping for Chinese market access. China takes the concessions and then discovers that Canadian products mysteriously don't meet newly invented quality standards or face unexpected delays at customs. Meanwhile, we've already lowered our tariffs, already opened our market, and getting China to reverse course or honor commitments becomes an exercise in diplomatic frustration. Ford's prediction about Trump's reaction isn't fear-mongering. It's basic pattern recognition. Trump has already demonstrated his willing to use tariffs as weapons, willing to blow up trade relationships when he feels disrespected or undermined, and willing to punish allies who don't align with his priorities. Canada slashing tariffs on Chinese EVs while Trump is actively trying to build economic walls against Chinese manufacturing is the diplomatic equivalent of inviting your friend's ex to your party after your friend specifically asked you not to. Sure, you can do it. But don't act surprised when your friend stops returning your calls and maybe starts talking about how your other friends are more reliable. The auto manufacturers themselves are probably losing their minds right now. They've been operating under one set of assumptions about trade policy, making investment decisions based on tariff structures that protect their market position, and suddenly the rules changed overnight. Companies don't like uncertainty. They really don't like sudden policy shifts that undermine their competitive position. When you're a car company trying to decide whether to invest in a Canadian plant or an American plant, and Canada just made itself more attractive to Chinese competitors, that math changes real quick. And not in Canada's favor. What makes this even more frustrating is that there were probably ways to negotiate better canola and seafood access without completely gutting automotive tariffs. Trade negotiations aren't binary. You don't have to choose between protecting one sector and destroying another. You can be creative. You can structure deals with safeguards, quotas, phase-ins, and conditional agreements that protect multiple interests simultaneously. But that requires time, consultation, coordination with provincial governments who actually understand their local industries, and a willingness to walk away from bad deals. Flying to Beijing and agreeing to slash tariffs in exchange for vague promises about market access isn't sophisticated diplomacy. It's desperation dressed up as deal-making. Doug Ford is also facing a political reality that Carney seems to have forgotten. Ontario voters care deeply about automotive jobs. These are good-paying union jobs that support families, fund communities, and represent the kind of economic stability that people build their lives around. When those jobs are threatened, voters remember. They remember who protected them and who sold them out. Ford has positioned himself as the defender of Ontario workers, the guy who fights for the little guy against elites making decisions in boardrooms and foreign capitals. This situation is a gift-wrapped campaign issue delivered straight to his door with a bow on top. The supply chain angle that Ford mentioned is crucial and often overlooked. When we talk about the auto sector, we're not just talking about final assembly plants. We're talking about parts manufacturers, logistics companies, engineering firms, design shops, and hundreds of businesses that feed into vehicle production. A tariff change that threatens automotive competitiveness doesn't just hurt the big manufacturers. It ripples through entire supply chains, affecting small and medium-sized businesses that don't have the resources or flexibility to absorb sudden market changes. Those companies employ real people in real communities, and when they struggle, those communities struggle. So where does this leave us? Well, we've got a Prime Minister who thinks he struck a great deal with China. We've got a Premier who thinks that same deal is an economic disaster in the making. We've got an American president who's already mad at Canada and probably about to get madder. We've got auto workers wondering if their jobs just became less secure. We've got canola farmers hoping China actually follows through on their promises. And we've got the rest of us watching this unfold wondering if anyone in charge is actually thinking more than 5 minutes into the future. If this whole mess has you as fired up as Doug Ford clearly is, smash that like button and let the algorithm know Canadian political drama is worth watching. Subscribe to Canadian Insights because we're covering every twist and turn of this disaster as it develops, and trust me, there will be more developments. Drop a comment and tell me your take. Is Carney playing four-dimensional chess or did he just sacrifice Ontario's auto sector for a bag of canola? I legitimately want to know what you think. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video where we'll probably be discussing whatever new crisis emerged in the last 6 hours because this is Canadian politics and nothing ever stays calm for long.